Devon used to be a regular gym goer when he followed a basic strength training approach. He was an endurance-based arm wrestler. His old routine, which combined heavy lifting for low reps with lighter weights for high reps, allowed him to maintain his strength over longer periods during a match. This was evident in his ability to stop opponents in later rounds. He was once known for his stamina and durability, a reputation he no longer holds today. This is one of the most popular pieces of footage from his glory days, often referred to as the golden era of hook training. He was doing something akin to singles, also known as a one-rep max, gradually increasing the weight until reaching a load that could only be lifted once. At that time, 80.8 kilos was out of reach for him. His record stood unbroken until Gennady surpassed it 14 years later.
I got it.
One of his most memorable matches was against Andrei Pushkar, where Devon demonstrated his entire training methodology. He was flash-pinned in the first round, but in the later rounds he toyed with Andrei. May God rest Andrei's soul in heaven. During that period, Devon relied on table time as his main strategy for gaining strength. In later years, he added another philosophy to his regimen: heavy singles. While this concept was not new, Devon became particularly focused on multi-spinner singles. He would perform sets of one-rep maxes on both the high and low cup multi-spinner. As he approached the period when surgery became inevitable, he moved away from heavy elbow lifting. This marked the beginning of the isolation era. He discovered that performing dynamic movements with arm wrestling muscles, rather than relying solely on static exercises, offered significant benefits. He became convinced that arm wrestling is not only about muscle strength but also about connective tissue. Dynamic movements activate both fast and slow twitch muscle fibers, something that cannot be achieved solely with heavy singles. Super-specific movements like rising and pronation, whether with free weights or pulleys, proved highly effective in developing the kind of strength that limits and isolates an opponent's structure. Starting with a small range of motion is definitely not ideal for beginners. This approach only makes sense for someone who has trained these movements for years and years, gradually narrowing down to focus solely on peak contractions. This type of training was popularized in powerlifting and weightlifting by people like Shiko. The infamous Bulgarian method also falls into this category. The philosophy behind these regimes is that a few individuals can withstand the intense training and, in turn, become champions. However, this also means that 98% of participants will drop out because the regimen is unsustainable for them. Devon's training style is a strange, makeshift extension of this approach. I call it makeshift because he seems to have little understanding of why he trains the way he does. To put it simply, for every Devon, there are 98 others who don't make it past the first few weeks of such training. And it's not as if Devon's body hasn't been deformed by this kind of training over time. These types of training programs start super light and gradually build up. Their philosophy is to never fail a lift. They're also constantly fatigued, so their routine one lift isn't even close to a true one-rep max. Additionally, they spend a ton of time on table work to build muscle and specific coordination. People often forget that Devon has been arm wrestling for multiple decades. His training has evolved over the years. This approach works for him because of his developed style and the immense amount of work he has put in over many years of training. The only way to know if this training can work for you is to try it for at least a few months and then gauge your progress. However, if I were to recommend a training style for arm wrestling, it would be Todd Hutchings' method, also known as the West Side Barbell Training. Devon is a genetic anomaly. His athleticism, endurance, and strength are all at freakish levels. It's generally not a good idea to copy the training regimen of genetic outliers, especially those who are also on steroids and train professionally. Even Devon Larratt has acknowledged this himself. He usually trains outside his natural style but has recognized the need to focus more on his inside game to build endurance in those positions. He also mentioned that he should focus on going for the pin rather than trying to wear his opponent out. Devon's finishing power is a known weakness. When he's pulling, he often gives the impression that he could pin his opponent whenever he wants. However, the reality is that he struggles with the pinning aspect of arm wrestling. He's just so skilled at everything else that his opponents often give up. It made sense for Devon to naturally focus on enhancing his already world-class strengths rather than working on bicep defense, especially knowing that he wouldn't be able to improve it to the required level in time. Let's not forget that he became the de facto number 2 in the world with his existing style and philosophy, and he arguably beat Erms more easily than Levan did, so he likely felt confident in his overall methodology. He used to train for bicep defense extensively, along with the kind of training he does now, so there must be a valid reason why he stopped or doesn't do it as much anymore. His recovery is slower. He can't make as many gains as before. He was even lighter this time than the last time he faced Levan, and he recently mentioned that overeating no longer helps him gain weight and strength. Instead, it just makes him feel sick or weaker and hinders his performance. Perhaps he simply can't incorporate as many elements into his training now without sacrificing other, more important aspects. The issue with Devon is that he's a bra scientist at heart, and his training method is often based on whatever half-baked idea he currently has. He has come up with all sorts of unusual philosophies, like side pressure being unnecessary, grip being unnecessary, biceps being important, biceps not being important, only training the cup for months, or only training one arm. Currently, he's in the rise, cup, roll phase, where he neglects all bicep training. Meanwhile, Levan has stuck to a basic bro split for 13 years without changing anything. Devon has been saying how perfectly healthy he is thanks to ultrasound and stem cell treatments and that he's the strongest he's ever been. He's been making consistent personal records, demonstrating his body's ability to recover and build. So, I don't think being old and damaged is the problem here. As I mentioned earlier, Devon constantly experiments and changes his training methods. It's not unrealistic to think he might start focusing on biceps again. This contrasts with the Georgians, who have stuck to a tried-and-true basic weight training routine for decades. Devon has also said that, given his age, he needs to focus on what matters. We could argue that he would benefit from adding bicep training since he's progressing in both training and health. However, it's also possible that he's healthy and progressing precisely because he's focusing his energy on what's most important. When discussing Devon's training, his years of conditioning and training experience are often mentioned. He has that base, which is why he can train the way he does and get away with it. It's also important to note that he has beaten all the guys who train like Levan, which shows that Devon's training works for him. Would lifting 80 kilograms in back pressure help him? Of course. But just like with gaining weight, can he do it? Instead, he finds a way around it. This is an assumption, of course. A comparison can be drawn between John and Irakli. Irakli has back pressure lifts that challenge Levan, but he lost to a guy who claims he doesn't lift weights at all. Is it the best comparison? No, but it does support the argument for selective training methods.